Well, a good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Q&A session here at MiraBan UK Film Awards, second edition. My name's Joseph Hart. I am your host for this festival. I'm joined by Joe Manari, who's our festival director, and also by James, who is our social media manager for Daniel Gabriel, who was director of the film Mosul. Hello, welcome to you both. How are you?
We're all right, thank you.
Good.
Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. So, unfortunately, Daniel couldn't be with us today, but we have got James, the expert, on hand to have our Q&A session with. So, a bit about Daniel's work. So, his work in storytelling was inspired by his work as a former Central Intelligence Agency officer, so that's the CIA, where he spent 10 years countering violent extremism and developing and benchmarking counter-radicalization theory and methodology in the Islamic world. Daniel is a graduate of George Washington University and holds an MBA from Babson College, as well as an MA in International Affairs from GW's Elliott School. And after leaving the agency, he completed a certificate programs in filmmaking at NYU's Tisch School of Arts and producing at UCLA's School of Theatre, Film and Television. Now, a bit about Mosul as well, the gritty thrill story of local militants and uneasy allies who banded together to liberate Iraq's second largest city of 1.3 million people from ISIS in 2017. So, James, my first question to you is, with all of Daniel's experience, his past work and all everything like that, what sort of experience and previous job experiences do you think he decided was, right, let's time to make a movie about this?
Well, that's a great question, but it would actually predate his work on behalf of the United States government. I believe Mr. Gabriel has always been a storyteller at heart, and he finished his undergraduate degree in journalism right before 9/11 happened. So obviously that both figuratively and literally rearranged the world.
Yeah.
And Mr. Gabriel enrolled in national security and Arabic language programs, and that segued into his work for the government. When he had really cut his teeth and made a successful career at the agency, he decided it was time to pivot back to what he originally wanted to do, which was tell stories. And it was all for the best, because he had so much more to tell, and he was so much more informed, specifically about a concept like Mosul, which is a very complex and informative case on what places in the Middle East can often be like in these tough times.
Yeah, definitely.
I was thinking about the character's story that you decided to bring up in Mosul, particularly these words seen from the eyes of a journalist that is witnessing this situation of division between different religions that try to bring themselves together against the so-called enemy, and so the enemy of my enemy is in a way my friend. I think what Daniel did great with this movie is that to bring up how much of the mistrust is actually built under the situation. And you, as I imagine, his social media manager that has been following him all over his travels, and I imagine also in the shooting and in the making of this film. What do you think, or what it might have told you about the perception of women in Iraq, especially seeing that one of the stories it desires to touch is of a woman who's basically a military officer herself. She's leading a group of male soldiers. She's the only woman there, and she, in a way, cooks for them. But she's not just a cook. She actually is there to make the war go on. So she's a matriarch. So what about this choice, and what are Daniel's impression on women in the Middle East?
Well, I'll begin from the point of sectarian conflict, and then move over to Hanadi, who is Mr. Gabriel's probably, if not certainly, favorite character in the film. But the sectarian conflict in Iraq, as Hanadi says in the film, is more dangerous than chemical and nuclear weapons. And the lack of trust between these groups is so insidious that it has virtually paralyzed any sense of progress, among other factors, obviously. But that's the primary, or one of the most primary roadblocks to moving forward with that said, the vacuum that existed and to a degree might still exist in the region is representative of what happens when life gets so aggressively desolate and hopeless. You start seeing these really interesting groups, congregations of different allies and the lack thereof, obviously, working in tandem. And when it comes to women in the Middle East, or specifically Iraq, Mosul's portrayal of Hanadi really speaks to, while some cultures are different than Western culture, so to speak, in terms of how we define what is societally desirable. Hanadi has emerged as a warlord. I mean, she talks about how all of her family has been taken away from all the war. Her life, pretty much since the 90s was war, and she's lost everything. And she openly, she bears it on her arm that the only thing she has left is a son, but she doesn't even keep him with her because it's too dangerous for who she is. And obviously all these men who are battle-hardened warriors, as keeping in mind she is as well, they all follow her allegiance because they trust her, and they trust that she's furthering the interest of what they're fighting for. And what she's fighting for is a resistance to sectarian divides. Now, with that said, the film examines many different groups of people, and something I know Mr. Gabriel was extremely focused on portraying was, this is a film by Iraqis for Iraqis, so to speak. The journalist Ali Molla, who's Iraqi, virtually gave the camera and mic to the people that we interviewed, and we let them tell their own take on the story. And so what's interesting about Hanadi, I guess, as a final note, is, while she cooks, there's also rumors of her cooking the boiled heads of ISIS fighters. Exactly. And then you have other stories of how she is, nothing but a, forsaken, wonderful person who was thrust into a world of extreme violence and rose out of it, for better or worse.
Right. It's actually impressive. I remember the first time I watched Mosul and saw the other judges, we were thinking how it was possible. I mean, I understand his background as a CIA officer, but how was the production in a way managing to shoot in a place where people were really shooting bullets? So it was actually, absolutely, when we watched them, we were like, this is real. They are shooting in a place where people shoot. So actually, that was, I'm trying to make it a bit more, let's say, light for the audience at home, but it's such a serious subject that we only wanted to know, how did it work? How the structure, how the narrative, how it was managed.
Well, Mr. Gabriel has an extensive knowledge and understanding of the region, specifically Iraq. That's where he spent a good amount of time in his government career. But the film crew was all Iraqi, and it was all filmed in pieces outside of the main skeleton of following the journalist, Ali Molla. And the film crew risked their lives. There's no fantastical way that we circumvented the risk. They really risked their lives to tell the story. And it's about as straightforward as that. They're tremendous, tremendous people.
Wow, that's impressive. I mean,
very. I mean, how long did Daniel know the team he was out there with before he said, this is what we're going to be doing, this is when we're going to start filming?
I can't say specifically for the total team, but in general, the base of it, at least for a couple of years to several years.
Oh, good. So it wasn't perfect. It wasn't just going down to film.
And absolutely. And they absolutely bore an incredible amount of risk to tell the story of Mosul. Yeah. The film crew was informed and guided by, Mr. Gabriel's knowledge and understanding of what will be strategic times to be out and about versus unfavorable times, so to speak.
And definitely. Go on.
Go ahead, Joe. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say the movie, it just stresses the conflict between ISIS and the local population, and the fact it isn't over, and that the current cooperation between the Sunnis, the Kurds, Christians, and all other is temporary sort of mistrust and lies under the surface. So what does Mr. Gabriel think is going to happen to Mosul according to what was witnessed out there?
I think Mr. Gabriel would be wise enough to make no predictions about what may or may not happen in the Middle East. But the hope is that while ISIS is defeated, so to speak, it's no secret that they're done. And they've just simply gone underground. There's a part of the film that's my favorite part, actually. It's so ominous at the very end. The camera pans over all the shaved beards of ISIS fighters that could see they were going down and decided to go underneath until they felt they were strong again. Now, the question I think we're all wondering is, are these groups going to be able to form a coalition that's strong enough to blockade a reemergence of ISIS? And with that said, ISIS also very quickly and rapidly set up a form, I hate to say it, a form of government. So they were extremely prepared when they entered Mosul, which is also very concerning because it just speaks to the underground unpredictability of certain people living in those areas.
Right. I was thinking about actually one of the people that were part of the documentary, the ISIS recruiter. That was actually one of the most tough to watch, and I would imagine even for Mr. Gabriel to speak and to have a conversation about ISIS, listening someone who was in a way defensive about his beliefs and our beliefs that are in a way causing a great amount of death and a great amount of danger and overall polluting humanly and emotionally an entire country and a city specifically, but also wide in a wider view also an entire country. So how was Mr. Gabriel's perception of the ISIS recruiters?
Well, I'm sure it was no surprise to Mr. Gabriel. As you mentioned, he spent a lot of his career benchmarking counter-radicalization theory. And so he spent a lot of time trying to win hearts and minds over there. So I'm sure he's been face to face with many people that are opposite of his beliefs and are parallel at minimum to Nasser Issa, the recruiter in the film that was captured from ISIS as one of their senior recruiters. His work, it was mainly focused on, or I guess let me back up. The part of the film really showcases how insidious the ideology that ISIS fighters and other extremists ascribe to. And that there's this line, and he said, even if you were to kill me now, I've already planted the ideology within 100 men. So, overnight, one down or one step forward, 99 steps back. And now, Mr. Gabriel, while he doesn't work on behalf of the government anymore, obviously, I believe he did want to, really, really illustrate that these people in ISIS are so determined that they've locked their jaw onto establishing a caliphate. And I'm sure his perception would be horrified, but also, the only thing you can do is try to raise awareness about it. Obviously, a lot of people are probably under the impression that ISIS has been defeated as of 2017. But it's important that people, are still aware that they're an active threat. And the more we ignore them, the stronger they'll become.
What do you think, Joe? Because I'm thinking as a person of the Western side, as I think, to be honest, ISIS is something in a way distant, but also a threat to us. I don't feel it defeated. Like sometimes when we talk about ISIS, I feel still threatened in a way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
so I can't imagine. What do you think, Joe?
I mean, as soon as anyone says ISIS, I always think they're always going to be. It's never. I don't think it's going to be defeated for a while anyway. Especially with everything that's going on, with the way the world is at the moment. We've got to look back at previous sort of attacks. So it's one thing I do like about this film is it's showing what's can done, and we're sort of like James said a bit earlier. We're still one step forward, 99 step back. At least we're having that one step forward of trying to defeat it and showing the world who ISIS really are and what the recruiters are like, and that sort. Even though, like you said, it's not the nicest thing to see when you're seeing all these what they're doing to people, but it's still important to see. It's just coming back again, looking at sort of the people we've mentioned in the documentary. Was there anyone's story that that Mr. Gabriel sort of was in either impressed or that stood out to him? Because we've seen Hanadi, what she does. Was there anyone else that sort of stood out for him?
Absolutely. Hanadi was definitely the most notable. Yeah. But Captain Allah is another favorite character of Dan's and myself. Mm-hmm. So what I guess it's so beautiful and painful at the same time, but I guess that's what you'd call art. Captain Allah's story hits so hard. I believe he was a lawyer before all the conflict started up in Iraq all those decades ago, and he's part of a very elite special operations unit, the Golden Triangle, on behalf of Iraq, the Iraqi armed forces. And when you hear him speak, especially in Arabic, but subtitles as well, his humanity resonates so strongly. Like, this could be your uncle, this could be your father, this could be your son. What defines him? His love for his family, he wishes he could return to his job, his love for his country, but not through any means of extremism, but through, agreed upon and as, fortified partnerships to fight back against something like ISIS as possible. And so, but then it's juxtaposed is like his whole life, basically, or the second half of his life was just nothing but conflict. And so while Hanadi is, very eccentric and unique, Captain Allah is like a normal, could be any citizen of any country, really, yet he's just as involved in this horrible, conflict.
I was thinking, overall at the picture that we have of Mosul, thanks to Mr. Gabriel, this is his directorial debut, it's important to say, and it's definitely astonishing. He worked as an executive producer in the past, but this is something that in a way stood out as probably one of the most impressive directorial debuts of all time, and not only because of how much courage everyone in the team had, because you need to, as you said before, agree to put your life in danger. And I think it also comes from a cultural perspective. I very much doubt in the Western side anyone would do that. It has to be something that touches your heart and your country. It has to be something that makes you feel that you are in a way at war for peace, which is obviously sometimes a contradiction in words, but you are doing it for the sake of survival. And I guess at least that is my impression, and please let me know what you think, both of you, and what Maya Daniel Gabriel said about it. If the perspective is informed, let's communicate this to the future generations. Is it in a way the hope that it's like with mafia in Italy? There was the first generation of Italians that were sometimes admiring mafia. Some of them, they would believe that in a way, being someone from the mafia would have been some upper state in the middle of the city. And then the generation after, at least the present generation, we never would say that we invite someone who's, some of this team. I remember Borsellino's words about mafia in general. he would say, I remember as a kid to be jealous of a kid that was a parent of someone who was in that, side. But then growing up, I understood what it was about and how you could actually make the difference. And thanks to people like him, we are now different. We perceive mafia differently, and hopefully was the goal of Daniel, in a way, approach the youngest generation and say, this is what's happening, this is what these people do, and you can make the change.
In many ways, yes, absolutely. So the filmmaking and the writing was 100% informed by his previous career experiences. And while he was no longer in a position to operate, he was turned back to storytelling. He was in a position to send a message or produce a message that was intelligent about what will be necessary to move forward. And that is where letting each side tell their own story becomes so important. And so, after not all the parties in the film were, super pleased with the final result, if they felt that other sides got an unfair shake on them, so on and so forth. But it is definitely meant to illustrate just how unreliable anything that comes out of Mosul is. As they say, the first casualty in war is the truth. They also have the story. There's a part of the scene where they're interviewing kids talking about, getting harassed by ISIS members. But then, Ali Mola turns it back on them and presses them for some details. And then all of a sudden their story changes and they go back and forth. And it's just like Hanadi. There's the story of her being, the forsaken widow that has stood up for her country and for what's right. And then there's the story of her being a vigilante that boils heads of ISIS fighters. And even furthermore, to the point, I guess, of the question, at the very end of the movie, it addresses the question. It's my absolute favorite scene. It says victory with a question mark. And then it starts, delving into what's going to happen to these ISIS fighters when the Iraqi government kicks back in. Where are they going to go and how are they going to get treated? And so far, it has not been the best, maybe, for long-term growth and peace. However, it very much informed, or Mr. Gabriel's writing and then direction definitely had a part of trying to illustrate, in a very performative way, like these are the roadblocks to move forward. And so we have a window where we can move forward again, or it's possible for some growth. But until there's more trust between these groups, and until there's more of an established, agreed upon understanding of a narrative of current events, it's very possible at a minimum that extremism will stay rampant.
Yeah, definitely. And I think coming from a personal point of view, I'd say that a big factor in this that was shown at the beginning of the documentary is putting fear in someone, putting fear in the audience, going, this is what's happening. And like Jay said earlier, you're actually shooting a documentary where people are getting shot. So it's that sort of thing, and then it's going back to informing what Mr. Gabriel's objective is, to inform the audience and to show them, yes, this is what's happening, but this is also what's happening. So again, it's going back to showing both sides of the coins, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have one last question myself. Since this movie is so impressive, and I imagine you are doing your best to secure distribution, or is there already a distribution agreement? And if you can tell possibly something about Mr. Gabriel's next projects, we're really curious about that.
There is a distribution agreement. The film can be found on just about any platform. So our website will be back up live shortly, but until then, it's available on Amazon Prime, Google Play, YouTube, Vimeo, so on and so forth. Now, I actually can't speak to what Mr. Gabriel's next project will be. I know he's got a couple that he's trying to pick between. I'm very excited to hopefully, be involved in it, and then to see what he'll produce. But I guess to not give you nothing, it will have to be something either a continuation or something similar in style, where he'll try to illustrate a part of the story that he knows to be true firsthand. You know, by a part of the story, I mean, it could be the Middle East, it could be Iran, you know, any area of interest over the past couple of years that's produced a very unique way to illustrate the truth that ultimately will bring a human side to a very international affairs-y, at least in perception, story.
Right. I think, actually, when you laughed at the beginning, I thought probably you imagined what Daniel would have said immediately, like, I'm not gonna give up any, I can't tell you anything.
Well, he won't tell me that much, so.
Yeah, I mentioned that. I think after this movie, I might have learned a bit about his attitude, so I expected probably that kind of projection. But thank you for sharing what you imagine it might be the next project.
Absolutely.
And I think it's the thing I can say on behalf of myself and Jay, whatever project will be definitely be worth watching compared to what we're expecting, so it'll be fantastic. So James, thank you so much for having a chat with us. Guys, the audience, you guys can see Mosul when you subscribe to MiraBan, and you can vote for it as well if it is your favorite on our website, www.miraban.com. So James, Jay, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much.
And remember, audience, that the winner of the best film of this edition will also be awarded the iPitch TV coupon that you can use to teach on the platform called iPitch TV, and it's good for connection with Hollywood producers and executives. So it's very worth voting for it. Please vote for Mosul if you loved it, and thank you so much, James, for being with us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.